This podcast is brought to you by New Life Ministries.
Welcome to the Every Man's Battle podcast. I'm your host, JJ West. On this podcast, you will hear honest conversation and encouragement for living a life of sexual integrity. Let's get to today's episode. Welcome back to the Every Man's Battle podcast. We are so glad that you are here with us. My name is JJ West. I'm the host, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in Florida. I get to work with couples and individuals dealing with sexual integrity issues, as well as the recovery process that follows. I get to speak at the Every Man's Battle Intensive and at the Intimacy and Marriage Workshop. And I'm joined by
Doug Barnes. Hi, JJ.
Hey, Doug.
A little bit about me. I am a licensed professional counselor in Texas. Have been for a long time. I've had the privilege of working with the Every Man's Battle Intensive for a long time now. I facilitate the small groups for the weekend. I've been speaker a few times, but mostly I get just a lot of joy out of just being with the guys in the groups. My practice in Texas is about individuals and couples working with sexual integrity, working with redemption, and really helping couples and guys put their lives back together after sexual integrity of any kind. Mm-hmm. So it's incredibly rewarding for me just to be a part of this process with you. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we are joined in studio today.
Yes, we are.
By Marc Cameron. We are so glad, Marc, that you are joining us today. Marc is a fellow licensed marriage and family therapist like myself, so we get to outnumber Doug today, which is super exciting.
It's okay.
Marc also serves here in California in private practice, as well as works with Mylon and Kay Yurkovich in How We Love.
Yes.
And Marc serves alongside us at the Intimacy and Marriage Workshop, which we've loved getting to work with Marc, and works with individuals, families, couples, both with the recovery process, but also, I mean, when you read Marc's bio, he does everything. Everything that is involved in the counseling process, I think you've had at least some experience in.
Yeah, some experience.
What are the things that you love to do most, though, in terms of private practice?
I love mostly working with couples.
Yeah.
And, when you work with couples, you get to work with families too, even if the kids don't come in. You are having that impact on them. I teach an attachment-based approach, which is a psychological word for the field of research in bonding. And so bonding goes all ways. It goes between a husband and a wife. It goes downward between the husband and wife as parents and their kids, but it also goes the other way, upwards between the husband and their wives and their parents. And so I'm helping people understand how their childhoods have impacted their expectations for a relationship, and teaching them when they've got an insecure attachment style and how that developed, and then how to earn and work your way toward a secure attachment style.
Yeah, fantastic.
Wow,
and
cool.
You and your wife facilitate workshops together, facilitate small groups at workshops together, which is fascinating to me because my wife would want nothing to do with the counseling world. So I'm fascinated to see, how does that work?
Yeah, well,
two therapists in relationship.
Well, she's not a therapist. She's a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So she mostly does the medication piece, but she's in the mental health world. So she understands this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's fun.
Do you guys get to diagnose each other all the time?
Of course. I diagnose a lot about her. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, as we said, we are so thrilled that you've joined us today for this really important topic. We're going to be talking about the differences between men and women when it comes to sex. Are there any differences? Are we just the same? Do we respond the same? And I was talking about the Intimacy and Marriage Workshop, and at a recent one, Marc shared with the audience some of those differences, some of the neurochemical differences, some of the emotional differences in the ways that men and women approach or respond sexually. And I would love for you to share some of that list with the audience so that we can start to have a framework, have a basis to talk about why, if there are any differences, why are those differences there? And what do we do in response to the fact that there are differences? So would you share with the audience some of the things?
Absolutely. So this is really the sex education that you didn't get at school, but it's so important. Now, the reason why this is so important is we've got to understand the design of something. You're not going to take your car out on the lake, or you wouldn't try and drive your boat out on the road, because it's not designed that way. So we really need to understand our design so that we can know how do we approach each other for success. And so, some of the differences that I shared, which have, they're complete opposites on many different things. And so men are oriented physically. Whereas women are oriented emotionally and relationally. They're oriented with wanting to have conversations. They're oriented with what's the connection like. But for a man, when it comes to sex, their sex drive occurs and ramps up in that moment. So they can be ready to have sex even if there's not been this long, strong connection that's happened throughout the day, which women often need. Men are stimulated by images and sight, which is why porn is so has such a strong draw for men. The porn industry knows that, and they target men. But women are stimulated by feelings, by emotions, by smell, by touch, by words, which is often why women want to have a conversation first before sex, or they want to have a back rub or a foot massage, or tell me about your day, because that's what helps ramp them up for sex. Men are quick to respond sexually and very difficult to distract during sex. Guess what? Women respond slower sexually, and they're much easier to distract during sex. Is the baby crying? Are the kids are in the other room? And that's all what's going on in their brain. Okay, now we're going to get to orgasm here. Orgasm for a man is short, it is intense, it's physically oriented in a man's penis, and it is solitary, a one-time deal only. But a woman, an orgasm is slow. It's more intense. It is emotionally oriented, not physically oriented like a man. It's in their brain, and it's potentially multiple. Okay, men need sex to relax. Men have a build-up, and it causes tension inside them, and having sex helps them relax. Guess what? Women need to relax in order to have sex. Again, why they may want a back rub or a massage. A man's goal during sex is to climax, and if a man doesn't climax, it doesn't feel satisfactory for him. But a woman doesn't have to have an orgasm every time. Would she want to? Of course. But it's more about the tension of the journey that a woman can enjoy too, because it's brain-based. A man's sexual desire is based on a single constant hormone, testosterone. So men just have a constant build, and then they need to release. But a woman's sexual desire is based on several changing hormones, and it occurs in a cycle. And here's the last one here. Men are quick to get in the mood and more likely to initiate sex. Whereas, and I've talked about this, women are slower to get in the mood, but they have responsive sexual desire. So they may not get into the mood until only after a man has initiated and they start to engage and they start to respond. And that's when their sex drive ramps up. So we are built in many ways
Very
completely opposite of each other.
So that raises a question. Why in the world?
Why in the world did God create us this way? And it's going to be one of my first questions when I get there. But I mean, I can tell you why I think so.
Yes, please do.
Of course, God's a creative God. He doesn't want us all the same. But sex is, it should be, in a marriage, it should be an emotional and physical event together. If women were built just like men, it could often just be a physical event. Okay. And so we're supposed to be engaged emotionally and physically when we have sex. That's what true consummate sex is. And so I think God has built us this way so that we learn to pursue each other in all of the ways that He has designed our brains and our bodies.
Absolutely. Yeah. I often will use the illustration of the little peg game, right? That triangle peg game. If you go to like Cracker Barrel or whatever, they have them on the tables, and little, you have to jump a peg, and you're supposed to end with one. And I know how to do that. I've figured out the pattern. I know how to complete the peg game. And if I'm going out with people that I maybe don't know that well, I'll do it just to impress them, right? I want them to see how smart I am, so I'll show them I can solve it. But you know what I don't do? I don't sit at home and play the peg game because I know how to do it. It's very familiar to me. There's no challenge there. There's nothing that engages me about that other than maybe just remembering the pattern. But it's a low level engagement. And to your point, I think if God made us all the same, especially for men, maybe different for women, but I think especially for men, we want to be engaged. We need to be engaged. And when it's not challenging, we lose interest, and we start looking for something more entertaining, more challenging, more engaging. So once you've mastered it, you move on to something else. And because we're so polar opposite, different in so many ways, I think it creates a lifetime of challenge. It creates this lifetime of engagement. What we sometimes do, so it's the difference between the peg game or maybe tic-tac-toe versus the labyrinth with walls that are ever changing. You know, a woman's heart, I think, is much more like that, this labyrinth with walls that are changing. And we can either choose to respond with, this engages me and I'm challenged by this, or we respond with, this wall wasn't here yesterday. I don't understand why it's here today. This isn't fair. I'm out of here, right? But the idea of those differences engaging us to learn more and grow and change ourselves. I think that's part of what you're saying and part of why God designed us so differently.
Yeah, and we're all made in the image of God. Yeah. And so, females are designed after God. So that's a part of how God is. And males are designed after God. It's a part of how God is. And so God has designed us to work this way in relationship. And as we learn how to seek and pursue each other, we'll learn how to seek and pursue God too, and vice versa. Yeah. It's not about our own desires.
So I have a question here. Something that I thought of is I'm listening. Talk a little bit about how in your practice or with the guys that you come in contact with, the husbands anyway, I'll own it. I did not learn how to engage. And so, I hear a lot of that in especially in my own practice of, I'm not in touch with my emotions. I don't want to be touchy-feely. It's almost forgive the words, I don't want to work for it kind of attitude. That's how it translates, but that's a little harsh. But talk a little bit about how you win a guy over to start engaging his wife as opposed to it being physical. Now I'm involving not only the physical, but the spiritual and the emotional in that.
Yeah, this is a big part of where I start, is just helping men understand the differences between male and female, because as you said, JJ, with the peg game, they only know one strategy, and they are assuming a woman, their wife, is aroused in the same way that they are. Yes. And men can be forgiven for that, right? Because that's what they're used to. Society. Media tell us that. Sure. Even if you take away porn, you watch TV shows, they show you that a woman is an aggressor. A woman initiates sex. There doesn't need to be all this deep emotional connection before that happens. And then if you watch pornography, it's really a woman behaving like a man. And so your brain gets primed for, okay, well, I'm aroused this way, and this is the way I work, and so you should be aroused this way. And men can be the architects of their own downfall in certain ways, because I've heard men say, well, my wife doesn't pursue me, she doesn't come after me, she doesn't initiate sex. But guess what? Women have responsive desire. Men have spontaneous desire. Yeah. So she's not designed that way. It doesn't mean because she's not pursuing or initiating sex with you that she's not into it or she doesn't like it. She's just following her design. So if you don't follow the design of something, if you put oil in your gas tank or gas where you're supposed to have oil, what do you expect is going to happen?
Right.
It's going to break down. It's going to malfunction. And so, and I started by saying, like, this is the sex education that you didn't get. This truly is the sex education that we should get and understand. And I didn't learn and understand this till just a few years ago.
Yeah.
That's good.
And so then we are perpetuating that brokenness over and over.
Oh,
and
yes.
over, right?
Yeah, we're perpetuating the cycle.
Yeah. And so to that point, then what happens to the woman's heart if the man just stays on that track of she must respond the exact same way I do, so I'm just going to pursue her the way that I get aroused, I'm going to pursue her the way that I'm interested? What happens to the woman's heart if that's my only approach?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because a woman is also feeling rejected in the same way that a man feels rejected. Men often perceive that their wives are the gatekeepers for sex, and the reason being because men have a physical buildup that needs a release, and it just keeps on building up and then release, keeps on building up and then release. Whereas a woman doesn't have that. But a woman, she does want to have emotional intimacy. Sex is a byproduct of emotional intimacy. And so when a man doesn't pursue her, she's missing out. But a man often perceives her as the gatekeeper. But she's longing for that emotional connection. So she feels unseen. She feels unknown. She feels misunderstood, just like a man does. She feels not wanted, not pursued, and her heart hardens too. At the same time, both people are wanting the same thing, this connection. But we're going about it in the wrong way because of how we've been primed to think.
New Life Ministries saved my completely broken marriage.
No matter how much hurt you've had to face, no marriage is beyond hope. At New Life Ministries Intimacy and Marriage Weekend, licensed counselors will help you rebuild communication skills and renew your commitment to each other. You don't have to settle for a miserable marriage or even one that's just okay. It's possible to experience a new level of intimacy and have a great marriage. To register or to find out more, call 1-800-NEW-LIFE or online at newlife.com.
Let's talk about that prime to think concept. How do we begin to change that, or maybe a better question is how do we change that in future generations?
Well, you have to know something before you can teach it. Okay, so now hopefully whoever is listening to this, you've been primed. You start to know this. So you're gonna have to memorize this. You're going to have to remember this because, again, you can't rely on the school system to teach your kids about sex, and it's not a one-time conversation. It's an ongoing topic. Right. So these are things that we really need to learn how to teach our kids about. I forget what the rest of your question was.
Well, it's I go back to I wasn't taught this either.
Yes.
Okay. So how do we begin to change? Because the culture is the influence of social media in all various forms, which perpetuates this same dysfunction, if you will. That's a bad word, but it perpetuates this. So how do we, I don't know, as a church or as husbands and fathers, start to change this in our kids so that it can change the future generations?
Yeah, and so it's just education, having them know this, but then also it's modeling. It's modeling that connection, because men oftentimes they're not as emotionally oriented, but that's actually not how we've been designed by the Lord.
No, correct.
A lot of times that's cultural. We're culturally designed. We're culturally primed to be emotionally avoidant, and that's part of the attachment work that I teach people how to do. And we, as men especially, can tend to overgeneralize. Well, men are just like this and women are just like this, and I'm not really designed to be that way. But guess what? You are designed to be that way, because when babies come out the womb, male babies and female babies, they need the same emotional connection and attunement for a parent for their brain to grow. And that's the foundational building blocks of connection. So we are designed to be this way. But as men get older in our culture, we're socially socialized to be avoidant. And you're called a sissy if you have emotions, and it's okay for the one emotion that's okay to have is typically anger,
right?
But because anger makes you powerful, it's non-vulnerable, but it also pushes people away.
That's right.
And so being able to see, when you can engage and you can understand this, you can really, might refer to it here as hacking the system, but this is the way that it's supposed to be designed. If you learn how to model that for your kids, because kids learn most from modeling. So when they see their dad going up to their mom and, helping her out, not just with the chores around her around the house, but light touches, non-sexual touches, by the way, hand holding, saying sweet things, building her up, then they get that modeling. Oh, this is how a man should treat a woman, and also this is how a woman responds. And asking and responding to her emotions as well as expressing his own emotions, right? All of that modeling is helping them, the children, to go, oh, that's what a man looks like. A mature, healthy man shows his emotion. A mature, healthy man draws his wife's emotions out. A mature, healthy man offers physical touch that's not just precursor to sex. Right? Over and over and over, they get to see that. I totally agree with you. It's so much less about what we're saying and so much more about what we're doing, what we're modeling for them. Oh, without a doubt.
That was not my experience growing up.
No, it wasn't my experience growing up. And I would guess it's probably not most people's experience growing up.
Correct. So it's going to take work to change that narrative, to change that expectation, right? It's going to take work. And we have to, and I would say as well, we have to take a stand against the cultural stereotypes, the jokes that, will often be said in whether it's the locker room or around the water cooler or whatever. Like, no, that's not true. That's not true that only men are interested in sex and women are just, as you said, the gatekeeper. Like, no, actually, when a woman's heart is stirred, of course she wants to have sex, right? Because that's the natural progression. That's the way it was designed, right? Like to start to stand against some of those lies that keep being perpetuated through stereotypes, through misguided humor, through like you were saying, social media or television shows or whatever, right? That over and over again, it's this myth that gets portrayed. To be willing to stand up and say, no, that's not true. And let me show you a different path. Let me show you a path that actually reflects how God designed this and the beauty of this union, as opposed to just the caricature.
I mean, women can just as much see men as a gatekeeper to sex. Some of the biggest insights I see between a male and female when we start to talk about sex in couples therapy is I will ask each of them, what's your desired frequency? And oftentimes, a woman's desired frequency is about the same or sometimes more. And I'll see the husband say, what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And because they're not getting what they need from a man. And if they did get that from their husband, again, sex is a byproduct of intimacy. I'm going to give you a quote here. It's from a guy called Viktor Frankl. And it's not actually talking about sex, but I'm going to relate it to sex. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor and a psychiatrist, wrote a fantastic book called Man's Search for Meaning, his unbelievable life. And in one of his books, he says, he's talking about success here. He says, for success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue. So it comes afterwards. You don't go after it. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. So sex, really, consummate sex ensues. It's not pursued.
Yes.
It's the byproduct of intimacy, emotional intimacy that occurs afterwards.
Yeah.
It's not expecting that, okay, well, we'll have sex and then we'll have the emotional intimacy. Now, that's not how it works. We've got it backwards.
Yeah.
The word that stood out to me was surrender. The word that stood out to me and what you just said was surrender to the other person. And so Scripture talks about husbands and wives surrendering to each other.
Yeah.
I just made that connection. That's really beautiful. That is a really cool description.
Yeah.
That's something that I think has a practical application in how we rethink about our sexual relationships with each other as husbands and wives.
Well, and to take it a step further, oftentimes we think of the idea of surrender as I surrender to a force more powerful than me. I surrender. I give up. You've overwhelmed me. You've overtaken me. That is certainly one of the ways that we surrender. That's a biblical model of surrender. One of the biblical models of surrender, that God is greater than us and we surrender to him. But there's another definition of surrender where two lovers surrender themselves to each other. Not because you're more powerful than me, but because I trust you. I surrender to you.
There's that word again, trust.
Right?
Yeah.
But trust, again, that's built up over time. That's not immediate. That's not, I walk in the door and, okay, you must trust me now, right? So am I doing the work to create a scenario, create an environment where you do trust me, where surrender, again, is that natural byproduct that ensues because of the work done to build connection, to build that bond, right? Yeah. So, Mark, let me ask this. What can someone who's in the audience, they're listening to the podcast, they're like, okay, that sounds good. I want to do what these guys are talking about. I want to learn how to pursue her heart. I want to learn how to, for us as a couple to function the way we were designed. How do I do it? What do I need more guidance. I need more help. Where could someone go to learn more or to be reminded of, other than just listening to the episode on repeat? Where else can they go to learn more so that they can start to live this out?
Yeah, one resource that I would suggest is a book by a psychologist called Dr. Julie Slattery. She wrote a book called God, Sex, and Your Marriage. And it's a very, very balanced book here. And so can we talk about porn for a second?
Oh, without a doubt. Here? On this podcast?
Of course we can. Of course we can. And so she has just some really amazing insights in her book. And one of the biggest insights that I took, there's many that I took from her book, but she talks about how the different chemicals in the brain when we have different types of sex. Okay, so when we have new sex, a different kind of chemical goes off in the brain to bond us to that person.
New sex as
like sex for the first time with
like with a new partner.
Yes, with a new partner. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, new sex, new partner.
I just want to show I'm tracking.
No, you're tracking. That's probably everybody was asking too. Like
already doing
what is new sex? New sex. Let me figure this out. So different chemicals go off in your brain, and the chemicals that bond you, and the chemicals that cause you to be excited. But when you look at pornography, when men look at pornography, they need to have deeper and deeper levels of stimulation because a chemical called dopamine goes off in your brain, which is the reward chemical, and it gets desensitized over time. So you need more and more and more, and you need different. Yeah. And so most men's experience when they're looking at porn is something different every single time. Well, guess what? All of these chemicals are going off in your brain. You're building, we have neural pathways for many different things. We have neural pathways for sex. And so your neural pathway for sex is new sex. Well, guess what? You're now chemically bonding to pornography, and you're conditioning yourself to want to have new sex every single time. Well, you're not having new sex with your wife every time. She's, the Bible says, be happy with the wife of your youth.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are actually conditioning yourself to reject your wife.
Yeah.
Chemically, and then also with the images, because bodies age, so you can't keep up with that. And so a man changes their baseline, and they get bonded. And a man's bonding chemical is called vasopressin. In fact, after sex, vasopressin can go up 500% and cause a man to want to connect more with his wife. And so, when men expect their wives to perform like the sex acts like they see in pornography, they're trying to go after something new is what they're really trying to do. And it's not an emotional connection that's happening. And your wife's sexual brakes get turned on there.
She feels used. She feels
and your sexual accelerator is way too sensitive because of how you primed yourself. So this transformation really comes down to confession. Going to your wife and saying, hey, listen, I'm learning a whole lot of things. And there's differences between us that I didn't realize.
Yes.
And I want you to know that, I'm not pleading the ignorance case here, but I am saying that I didn't know. And now that I do know, I see that there's differences and I was pursuing you in a different way. And I just want to apologize for that. I just want to say sorry if your wife knows about your pornography use, or if she doesn't, confess that and tell her that you've primed yourself to reject her and not pursue her. And that's something that you want to change. If you can have that kind of vulnerable conversation, guess what I said about wives? They want that emotional connection. They want that vulnerability. They will actually draw closer to you. Sure, if you're confessing something for the first time, or there's been, a lot of tension, there may be anger, but that's just probably because they feel like they're being allowed to have the anger in that moment. But that, as you confess, that will subside and they will feel closer to you. But this is the way back, right? You've gone a long way down a path, and that's what repentance is. Repentance is a U-turn.
Yeah.
So you got to U-turn and you got to come back down the path. Don't expect it to be instantaneously and that everything's going to change. But growth is hard work. It's pain. It's discomfort. It's effort.
Right.
Okay, and sex is not like it is in the movies. It's not easy. It's not completely spontaneous and amazing all the time. It's a negotiated event. So if sex is broken in your relationship, it's because something else is broken in your relationship.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Really, really good. And I think that there are probably audience members who are saying, yeah, our sex life is pretty broken. It's not what I would want it to be. And maybe it has to do with some of these differences that I wasn't aware of. And I think, okay, so if that's you, if that's been your response, you're as Mark talked about, you're recognizing for the first time, wow, there are these major differences that I wasn't aware of, and I've certainly not attended to. Man, a next step is probably going to be having that conversation with your spouse to say, I didn't know about these differences, and I'm sorry for the way that that's impacted our relationship, but I want to learn, I want to grow, and I want us to be able to talk together, not only about the differences, but then how do we start to celebrate these differences, and how do we start to let these differences be the weave together in a way that builds our sexual relationship, builds our emotional relationship, builds our spiritual relationship. But we have to do it together. I have to be humble enough to recognize, I have blown it. I have not seen this. I have to humble myself, and then we come up with a plan, right? Then we together work on how do we celebrate and highlight these differences in a way that builds each of us up, and how do I draw you out? Because if your way of relating is responsive, how do I initiate it in a way that allows you to respond well, right? And if there's barriers, let's work on removing those barriers, right? But it's going to taking that next step of having the conversation.
Yeah, and I think, and dads also need to realize this about their daughters, obviously not in a non-sexual way, but you need to pursue your daughter as a dad. She responds to intimacy by being pursued. And also, if you have a daughter, don't you want her husband to respect her design? You need to teach her to go counter to what the cultural messages are teaching her of how she should behave and how she should be for a man. And I love what you said there about learning to accept and respect and celebrate her design. She's not broken.
Right.
So you need to teach her that these things should be celebrated and they're normal about her, and then she'll find a man who treats her this way.
One of the things that stands out to me in the list, because we do respond so differently in so many ways, I think, again, I'll own it, as a man, sometimes I can interpret, you're just not sexual.
Because we hear that in our offices
because you don't. Yeah, we hear it in our offices, right? Because you don't respond sexually the way that I do, you're not sexual. And I love, Mark, what you're saying here, because that blows that myth out of the water. Yes, men are sexual, and yes, women are sexual. We're sexual in ways that dovetail each other. We're not sexual in ways that are mirror images of each other, right? And so to be willing to recognize, these differences actually make our relationship better. It makes it stronger. The fact that we're not the same.
Yeah, you've misunderstood the design. That's why it's kind of cool sometimes to see a man's face when I said, ask that question about frequency, and they're like, "What?" Yeah. Because they think, you're just not a sexual being, and their wife is a sexual being. She's just aroused in a different way, and we need to learn that, and we need to realize too that we are designed to pursue her in that way. So that means we're supposed to develop these things about ourselves as men too. That's in our design.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's great.
And here's the key, right? Okay. There's design versus what we've been trained in terms of our culture. And so coming out of this, what I'm hoping you will be challenged with is to look at what are the differences in terms of design rather than how I've been shaped to believe by my culture. By everything that's come,
my locker room, my next door neighbor,
whatever. Over and over and over again. Right. Thank you guys for listening today. Mark, thanks for
having me. It's been awesome to be on here.
Fantastic. We are glad that you guys are listening. Can I encourage you once again that if you have found this to be helpful, one, would you let us know? Would you shoot us an email, drop a line in the comments. You can shoot the email to embpodcast@newlife.com just to let us know what has been helpful, or if you have questions that we haven't answered, or if there's a topic that maybe we haven't covered yet that you would love to hear more on, let us know that. But also, if you found this to be helpful, would you share it with someone else? Maybe that's a brother at church or in your small group. Maybe that's a pastor or a care group leader. Maybe that's a friend at work. Share it with someone else, because we know that even though we're thrilled with the audience response, we know that there's a whole lot more out there who need to hear, have not yet heard. So would you please share it with someone?
Well, and then one person else to share this with. Share this episode with your wife.
Yes.
Double check everything that I'm saying.
Yes.
And see if she agrees with you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right?
Absolutely.
And this in itself will be a way to start to rebuild the connection.
It invites the conversation.
Yes.
It invites the conversation. So thanks for being part of our conversation. We hope that you will continue to be a part of our conversation. Next episode, we're going to have another guest in studio. We're going to have Sam Frazier. Dr. Sam Frazier is going to join us, and we're going to be talking about managing long-term recovery. What does this look like down the road, years into? What does recovery look like there? We're going to talk about, being a part of recovery groups and Brothers in the Battle in particular. So we hope that you'll join us. Until then, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. This podcast is just one of the many ways we can encourage and help you. If you're looking for more help, visit us at newlife.com or call 1-800-NEW-LIFE. Please remember to review, like, and share the podcast as it helps others find us. If you have a comment about this podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at embpodcast@newlife.com. See you next week.